Aloha, G-Bumpy 2000. Back to read some more of Slappy's Nightmare. Would you like to read Slappy's Nightmare with me? How are you liking Slappy's Nightmare so far? I like this one. Let's pick up where we left off. Chapter 15. The Kramers lived in a large white stone house with the white columns in front on top of a steeply sloping front lawn. Flower gardens stretched along the house on both sides of the columns. The grass down the hill to the street was smooth and clipped short, dotted with well-trimmed evergreen shrubs and tall, graceful trees. It was such a beautiful sunny day, Georgia decided to hold the ventriloquist show on the front lawn. She wheeled Maggie out in front of the flowers. Then she carried a folding chair for herself from the big garage and back. Maggie was 11 years old. She was a short, wiry girl with wavy blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a dazzling smile. She hadn't been smiling much lately. She was athletic and very energetic, the kind of person who never liked to sit still. Ever since she broke her hip water skiing on a vacation with her parents, she felt trapped in the wheelchair. Georgia hoped that spending some time with Maggie would cheer her up just a little. Squinting into the sun, Georgia sat down on the folding chair and propped Slappy on her lap. "I'm not very good yet," she confessed to Maggie. "I just got Slappy, and I haven't really had time to rehearse any kind of act with him." Georgia waited for Stella to make a sarcastic comment, but Stella had promised to be on her best behavior. She didn't make her usual nasty remark. She sat cross-legged in the shade of a tall evergreen tree, her face hidden by the floppy purple hat, absently pulling up blades of grass with both hands. Georgia fumbled her hand inside the dummy's back till she found the controls for his mouth and eyes. She opened and closed the mouth several times, testing it out. "I'm kind of nervous," she told Maggie. "Why be nervous?" Maggie asked, fidgeting in the wheelchair. "It's just me, and you know, I laugh at anything. Thanks for the encouragement. I need it." Georgia declared. She turned to Slappy. "How are you today, Slappy?" "We beep," she made Slappy reply. "What does that mean?" Georgia asked. "It means I have a frog in my throat," Slappy replied. It was a dumb joke, but Maggie laughed. "Are you feeling sick today?" Georgia asked the dummy. She made his mouth click up and down. "No, but my head hurts." "You've got a headache, Slappy?" "No, splinters." Maggie laughed and slapped the arms of the wheelchair with both hands. "Georgia, you're good," she exclaimed. "I can barely see your mouth move." "Ha ha," Stella chimed in sarcastically from down on the grass. "Remind me to laugh." "Stella, you promised," Georgia scolded. "Oops, sorry," her little sister murmured. "Do some more," Maggie urged. I love Slappy's squeaky voice. It's very funny." "You're funny too," Georgia made Slappy say to Maggie, funny looking. "Now, don't get insulting, Slappy," Georgia scolded him. "Didn't your mother teach you any manners?" "How could she?" Slappy replied. "She was an oak tree." Maggie tossed back her head and laughed. "Georgia, this was so nice of you," she declared. "Yes, and nice of me," Slappy thought happily. "Here I am, entertaining a girl with a broken hip. What a good deed. And all I have to do is keep my mouth shut and act like a dummy. Good deed number 1 for Slappy. I'm still alive. Still alive." "Slappy, do you know how to stop a wild elephant from charging?" Georgia asked. "Take away his credit card?" she made Slappy reply in a squeaky, mousy voice. "I heard that one," Maggie declared, "but it's still funny." Georgia turned back to Slappy, but a shout from the house made her stop. "Georgia, the telephone call for you." Maggie's mom called from the front door. Georgia jumped up. "I'll be right back." she told Maggie. She set Slappy down on his back on the grass. Then she went jogging to the house. It's probably Mom with some kind of message, Georgia thought. She was nearly to the front door when she heard the scream, a high wail of horror. Help me! Somebody! Ah! Georgia's heart leaped into her throat. She spun around and saw the wheelchair rolling down the hill. Bumping hard over the grass, picking up speed, Maggie's arms flew up helplessly, grabbed at nothing but air. Faster, faster! The wheelchair rocketing down the steep hill, down the street. Maggie's terrified cry rang in Georgia's ears. Help me! Stop this! Somebody! Georgia saw Stella, on her feet now, standing so stiffly, frozen in terror. With Maggie's cries in her ears, Georgia took a few lurching steps down the lawn. She heard the shrill squeal of car tires before she saw the blue van roar onto the street. No! Georgia let out a helpless cry as the wheelchair bounced on its collision course with the speeding van. Did the van hit Maggie's chair? Georgia's eyes blurred from her terror. But now she saw Maggie fly up from the chair, fly onto the pavement. Maggie's screams stopped. Such a heavy, heavy silence now. Maggie didn't move. Chapter 16. Maggie? Maggie? Georgia called her name all the way down to the street. The blue van skidded to a stop. The driver, a young man with long hair falling from under a bright red Wisconsin cap, came running out. Is she okay? Is she? He called. Georgia reached Maggie first. She dropped down onto the street beside her. Stella and the van driver stood above them. Maggie, Georgia called, can you hear me? I didn't hit her, the young man said breathlessly. I swerved. I saw her fly out of the chair when it bumped over the curb. But I didn't hit her. Ow, Maggie groaned and gazed up at Georgia. My arm. She shut her eyes. Your arm, Georgia repeated. It's killing me, Maggie replied, keeping her eyes closed. I landed on it. I heard it crack. I think I broke it. Does anything else hurt? Georgia demanded. Maggie opened her eyes. No, I don't think so. She groaned in pain again. Just my arm. You're lucky, the young man said. Maggie uttered a cry. Lucky? Now I've got a broken hip and a broken arm. The ambulance came a few minutes later. Mrs. Kramer rode off with Maggie to the hospital. Georgia picked Slappy up off the grass and began walking home with Stella. In all the fright and excitement, she hadn't had a chance to talk to her sister. What happened? She asked Stella, sliding Slappy over her shoulder. You were the only one with Maggie. How did the wheelchair get loose? Stella swallowed hard. She lowered her head, hiding her face under the floppy hat. Come on, Stella. Answer me, Georgia insisted, grabbing her shoulder. You're not going to believe me, Stella stammered, still avoiding Georgia's eyes. Georgia stopped walking and spun Stella until she faced her. Excuse me. Tell me the truth. Stella hesitated. The dummy did it, she said finally. The dummy pushed her. Stop it. Stop it, Georgia cried, shaking her sister by the shoulders. Stop making up stupid stories. What really happened? You didn't push Maggie, did you? Huh? Of course not, Stella gasped. And then she began to sob, racking sobs that made her shoulders tremble. The dummy pushed her, Georgia. You've got to believe me. I wasn't really watching. I was looking at a squirrel up in the tree. And, Georgia demanded, holding on to Stella's shoulders. And then what? What did you see? I heard Maggie scream, Stella replied, tears rolling down her cheeks. I turned and saw Slappy. He was standing behind the wheelchair, and the wheelchair, it was moving, rolling down the hill. Georgia rolled her eyes. Then what did Slappy do, she asked. I'm not sure, Stella said. I was so scared. I didn't watch him. I was watching Maggie. I guess Slappy dropped back onto the grass. He pushed her. Then he dropped back where you left him. But that's crazy, Georgia cried. She lifted the lifeless dummy from her shoulder and held it out to her sister. "Look at him, Stella. Take a good hard look at Slappy." Stella pulled back with a shudder. "I don't want to. I already looked at him, Georgia." "Look at him," Georgia insisted. "He's just a dummy, right? He's made of wood, right? He's just a suit of clothes with a head and shoes, right? Right?" "I'm not crazy," Stella screamed. "I'm not." "Yes, you are," Slappy thought bitterly. Stella really is a liar, Slappy realized. She's sick. "I didn't touch that wheelchair. I was lying flat on my back in the grass. I never moved. I never even saw what was happening." Stella is a liar, Slappy decided. A dangerous liar. She's ruined both of my good deeds. Both of them. I'm back to zero thanks to her, and time is running out. Well, I'm afraid time is running out for Stella. I don't know why she's trying so hard to ruin George's life, but I can't let her destroy mine. Stella's dead tonight. Wait, my bad. Stella is dead meat. Tonight's the night. Chapter 17. That night after dinner, Georgia had her science project spread over the dining room table. She kept peering into her container of snails, making observations as she filled out charts and made careful drawings. Slappy sat propped in a dining room chair across from her. He stared blankly ahead at the snails, but he wasn't paying attention to them. He was listening to the conversation George's mom was having on the phone in the next room. She had been talking for nearly half an hour to her sister, talking about Stella. "It's reached the point where I don't know what to do," Mrs. Boonshoff was saying. "Stella has always been difficult, but she's certainly never been violent before." George's mom was pacing back and forth tensely in the living room, the phone pressed against her ear. Slappy could see her worried expression every time she passed the dining room doorway. I know, she said, sighing. "Telling lies and making up wild stories is one thing. I can deal with that. But, Lila, I honestly think Stella pushed that poor girl in the wheelchair down the hill." Mrs. Boonshoff paced rapidly, tugging nervously at her dark hair with her free hand. "I don't know why Stella's jealous of Georgia," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't understand it, Lila, but it's out of control. Stella's completely out of control." "I know. Yes, I know. I talked with Stella all afternoon. I tried to get through to her, but she kept insisting that George's new ventriloquist dummy pushed Maggie. Can you imagine it? Stella keeps talking about that dummy. She keeps blaming it for the awful things she's doing. I don't know. Maybe I should take her to a doctor." "No need for that," Slappy thought, staring blankly at the snail container. "You don't have to bother taking her to a doctor. I'm going to take care of the Stella problem tonight." Why are they stars here? Later, Georgia cleaned up the dining room. Then she called goodnight to her mother and carefully carried Slappy upstairs to her room. Slappy glimpsed Stella's room across the hall. The lights were out. The door was open. Good, he thought. Stella left the door open for me. That'll make it easier. Of course, everyone will be sad when they find Stella in the morning. Georgia will turn to me to cheer her up, and that will count as a good deed. "Sorry I didn't pay any attention to you tonight, Slappy." Georgia lifted the dummy up in front of him. "That's okay," she made him reply. "Well, have a good sleep," she chuckled. "Sleep tight. Don't let the termites bite." She started to raise him onto a high bookshelf. "No, wait," Slappy thought frantically. Put me down on the floor where you left me last night." She plopped him onto the high shelf and slid him against the wall. "Why is she doing this?" Slappy asked himself, staring blankly down at her. "Doesn't she know she's making it harder for me to get across the hall to her sister's room?" Slappy sighed. "I can't catch a break here. Bad enough I have to do 3 good deeds or I'm a dead man." Why do they have to make it so hard? A few minutes later, Georgia turned out the lights and climbed into bed. Slappy waited until her breathing slowed, and he knew she was asleep. I have to climb down now, Slappy decided, very carefully and quietly. I have no choice. I have to do this. I can't let Stella keep messing up my good deeds and then blaming me for the things she does. He edged away from the wall, slid himself to the front of the shelf. He peered down. It was a long way to the floor, he saw. But he could lower himself easily from shelf to shelf. Then the last drop wouldn't be too far. Here goes, Slappy told himself. He turned himself carefully to face the wall. Then, gripping the top shelf, he lowered himself silently over the side. His big shoes dangled in the air for a moment, then found the next shelf. Slowly, he grabbed the next shelf down and began to lower himself again. But this time his foot caught against something, bumped something hard. Books started to fall. Thud, thud, they crashed to the floor. No! The cry escaped Slappy's mouth. His hand slid off the shelf. He fell, landed with a hard thud. And another pile of books fell on top of him. Ow! A heavy dictionary or encyclopedia landed on his head. Bright red lights flashed in his eyes. Groaning, he turned to the bed. Did the noise wake Georgia? Yes. To his horror, he watched her stir and raise her head. That'll be enough for this time. Thank you for reading Slappy's Nightmare with me. I'll be back next time and we'll read a couple more chapters. Until then, I'm going to have to stop recording.